Everything is fueled from me wanting to be a better person on earth.
It's time to do your part.
Welcome back, everybody, to Do Your Part. Again, it's all about doing your part today. Carolyn is here to do her part. Carolyn Caldwell, she's a local hero. I'm going to call you that. We were talking about the words mentor and other highlighted words, and really kind of describe her. So Carolyn's here. I'm so glad. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thank you. And thank you for asking me to be your guest today.
Of course, of course. I always ask guests, why are you here today? And so what's your answer to that? Why are you here today?
You know, you reached out to me and wanted to hear what I had to say, and particularly with everything that's kind of happening in our country right now. I've had other people do the same thing. I think I shared with you. I did a podcast not too long ago with Becker's Healthcare, just talking about healthcare. And the fact that you asked, I looked at some of your other podcasts and I thought, gosh, if there is anything that I can say that would make a difference or that people would find useful, definitely want to do my part. So thank you.
No, thank you. You know, I don't know too much about you, but I know that you are a risk taker, and you definitely have just your career alone speaks about your personality. And, you know, everybody has a story, but I know yours is going to be a lot in a positive way. Right? Because we're not here to be doom and gloom. I want to just hear about you and, again, your perspective. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start with this. Where are you from? I know you're not from the Coachella Valley.
No.
Okay. Tell me a bit about your upbringing and where you're from.
So you didn't pick up on the Southern accent?
Well, right when you said accent, I heard it. Can I guess Texas?
Alabama.
Oh, I was way off.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I grew up in a small town in rural Alabama, Camp Hill, Alabama. And my parents were older. They adopted me when I was a baby. So I grew up as an only child.
Wow.
And my father couldn't read and write. My mom didn't finish school. I think she had maybe like an 8th grade education.
Were your parents black?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, but I was so proud of them because, you know, there's been conversations lately about land ownership. And so they owned land. They were very well respected in the community. They taught me, you know, to be a very strong person, to speak up for myself, and to really be a good person, treat people right, have good credit.
Really?
Yeah. Your word is your bond. My mom always said, if you tell someone you're going to do something, then you need to do it.
Yeah.
And they were very, because it was a small town, but everyone respected them because of how they carried themselves. And the thing with respect and having good credit, because my mom, she took pride in the fact that she could go to the local store or the local furniture store and just pick out what she wanted and walk out of the store. And she would say, when you have good credit, you can do that. And so those things meant a lot to me, you know, growing up as a child. And the fact that they weren't formally educated, that never bothered me, right? The only thing was that because they weren't formally educated, they just wanted me to graduate high school. And they already had these grand plans that I was going to, you know, take the 2.5 acres that were above our house, marry the local guy that I had been dating forever, you know, and we would build a house there and have lots of grandbabies for them, and life would be good. But that wasn't what I wanted. And so I was always really smart, really good in math and science. And so I actually got a scholarship. And so this is going to be a little bit embarrassing, but it all worked out in the end. So
This is you getting vulnerable.
I
That's what we want.
know. I got a scholarship to Alabama A&M in Huntsville, Alabama. It's an HBCU. I had a scholarship to Montevallo, which is in Montevallo, Alabama, and it was mixed, you know, campus. And then I had one for the local junior college. I didn't want to go to the local junior college because everyone who had gone there never finished. They never graduated. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. And so I didn't know a lot about different universities because my parents weren't formally educated. So I talked to the school counselor and I said, you know, what did you do? What do I do? I was a valedictorian, but there were like only 35 kids in our class, but like I was number one. And so Miss Brooks said, okay, let's talk about this. And I still remember to this day, she took out the school yearbooks for both universities. Of course, Montevallo was mostly white. You know, there were some African American kids there, and it just looked really boring. And then I took Alabama A&M, and I'm like, wow, you know, this is awesome. And this is the embarrassing part. There was like this really, really cute guy in the book. And I said, Miss Brooks, do you think he'll still be there when I get there? She goes, oh, I'm sure he will. And so that was how I picked which one I would go to. Of course, when I got there, I probably spent a couple of weeks looking for this guy, only to realize that probably was an old book and he's gone, right? But that was how I did it. And I say that now and say, gosh, that was a little bit embarrassing, but not really. You know, that was kind of even starting then, being able to go to people that can mentor you and guide you. Obviously, both parents are deceased now, but they were just really, really so proud, you know, of those accomplishments. They were sad that I left home to go to school, but they were very proud. I had to give the ring back because the guy and I were engaged that I was supposed to marry and build a house with. They were a little sad about that. But they realized that, you know, I had to live my life and that there was more for me than just what was there in that small town.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. And I knew I would. As I tell you, I take notes, and I've already got a full page here. It's interesting to hear these things as far as, I don't think it's embarrassing at all. That's what led you to that school, and that's part of your story.
Right.
B, my question is, did you ever find that guy?
The guy that, no.
That you found it? Okay. Well, you had his name.
I had his name. He was adorable. But I think what Miss Brooks didn't tell me at the time, the high school counselor, is that probably was an old book.
Right.
And he just was nowhere to be found. And she was probably thinking, if this is what's going to get this kid to go to school, the answer is yes.
He'll be there greeting you.
Yeah, he'll be there.
Right. I had to ask because I think as a listener, I'd want to know. Also, and I'm going to jump all over the board as I tend to do. Did either of your parents ever learn how to read?
My mother could read.
Okay.
She had maybe like an 8th grade education. And my father, no. It was what was very interesting. You may not know anything about this, but, you know, in those days, a lot of African Americans the way they would sign their name was with an X. And that was how my father would sign his name because he couldn't read and write.
I've never heard this.
Yes. And so I did teach him how to write his name. I taught him what my name and what my mom's name looked like. And I tried to teach him how to read, but I couldn't because I realized that he had learned his own way of how he learned. And when the first time Daniel went home with me, I told him, I said, look, Dad can't read and write, so I don't want you to, you know, take him someplace and end up embarrassed or whatever or embarrass him. And he's like, okay, fine. So they went to town. They loved going to town. And so we lived in a small town, but they would go to, you know, Auburn, Alabama. That's where all the shopping was. So Daniel came back and he says, your dad can read and write. I said, no, he can't. I said, let me guess. I said, he knew all the different cars. Like if there was a car with a tag from a different state, he knew that. He goes, yeah. He said, we went in the store and he knew the brands of different products. I said, my mom buys the same thing. So he knows it's Tide washing powder. He knows those things. He goes, yeah, but when we went to eat last night at Shoney's, he got his menu out. He ordered. I said, because he orders the same thing. I said, he just doesn't know how to read and write. I said, but he's a very smart person. Right. And so I said,
he has his own, he created his own way of learning.
Right. I said, so he created his own way of learning. I said, so you would never know that he couldn't read and write if you just knew that he couldn't. And so as I got older, I did realize that, you know, they were both vulnerable because they weren't, you know, formally educated, and I didn't want anyone to take advantage of them. And so I told my dad, I said, okay, don't ever sign your X, and now you know how to sign your name, so don't do the X anymore, but don't do that on anything, you know, unless you let me know or unless you let Mom know. I didn't want someone to give them something and him not real understanding and end up signing the land or the house away.
Yeah, somebody taking advantage of it.
Exactly. And so that was, as I got older, I realized that even though they were smart, that I had to really make sure that I put boundaries there
Yeah.
and that I protected them, from themselves or just from other people.
Well, it sounds like they were open to you being clear about how you were protecting them too,
Oh,
showing them
absolutely.
examples and steps. So let's talk a little bit about where you were raised, because the fact that your parents owned land, that's a remarkable story in its own, or was this something that was kind of prevalent where you were living?
It was prevalent. I mean, it was, like I said, that was an era where I think that was how people, particularly African American people, they showed their wealth. It was, you owned land.
Uh-huh.
So our house was on 2.5 acres of land. They had, 10 acres of land that they would sell wood from. And I remember, when I was in college and, had moved away, and my mom said, we want to sell that 10 acres of land. They were smart also in that as they got older, they put everything in my name. And being an only child, that made it easy.
Yeah.
And so my mom called. She goes, hey, we want to sell that because now we're older. We just want to have the money. And I'm like, of course. She goes, well, you own it. You got to sign it. Let
They're
us
asking for your
sell it.
permission.
I'm like, oh, great. Just whatever I need to do. Just let me know. But they were very proud. They were just very proud that they could own the land and that people in the community really looked up to them. The thing about that was that, I couldn't get in trouble because my maiden name was Hogan. We were the only Hogans in the community, so everyone knew me. I made the stupid mistake one time of skipping school in high school, and by the time I got home, my mom knew I had skipped school. Because, we're walking around downtown.
And people are seeing you.
Yeah, and someone called her and said, hey, she's walking around downtown. And I get home and she's like, all right, let's just say I got in a lot of trouble that day. But that was the brand, the name. And she would always say, you can't ever bring shame on our name. And they were just proud of how they did things, and they raised me to be that way.
So it sounds like, and again, I'm only hearing bits and pieces, but it sounds like you had a pretty pleasant upbringing and a pretty pleasant childhood.
It was pleasant. It was simple, but it was pleasant.
So Alabama, we're thinking like burning crosses and stuff like that. That's
No, I think because it was rural, right? And so when you're rural, everyone's rural. Whether you're black or white, I mean, we're all just living in this little rural town together. The one thing I do remember when the schools were integrated, because before, the schools were segregated, obviously, but it wasn't like, nobody really talked about it. I mean, we knew it. And then when they integrated the schools, there was that tension. And then some of the families did take the white families took their kids to other places to go to school. And I still remember there was this gentleman who owned the local milk dairy, and he was friends with my family. When my parents passed away, he was at their funeral. And I still remember the night he came to our house because they were going to send their kids to this other school because the schools had integrated. And he came in and he said, John and Ethel, I need to talk to you. And of course, I told you about Mom. They're very proud people. She's like, okay. And he goes, I want you to know it wasn't my decision to move the kids. He put it on his wife. He goes, it was Barbara's decision. And my mom said, she goes, no, it was your decision. And you went along with it. That's just how they were, right?
Called him out.
And just called him out, and
Yeah.
he turned and walked out. So I remember that little bit,
Wow.
of the stress of growing up, when that happened. And basically, that's all I remember. Went to college, Alabama A&M in Huntsville. I did marry my college sweetheart, and the courtship lasted longer than the marriage. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, wow.
We dated all through college, graduated, we had our daughter, and when she was probably about 15 months old, I think we both realized that we didn't really know each other because we spent all our time dating, but we didn't know each other as adults. And it was pretty obvious that, this is not going to work. And so got divorced. And I was a medical technologist at the time working in the lab. And I knew that, salaries were just not that great in Alabama. Had this little baby at the time, and I thought, where can I go and do well financially? So I took out my our business journal that we got every month, and I just started applying for jobs and found this job in Midland, Texas, of all places. They were paying a lot of money. It was Midland, Texas, and it's like, okay, I'll move there. You know, they moved me there and everything. And when I got there, and I'm a very spiritual person, I thought, God, why am I here? I mean, this place is dreadful, but you know, everything just fell in line. And I ended up meeting Daniel, my husband, probably shortly after I got there. His sister introduced us. We were engaged in a month. We were married 10 months later.
Whoa.
And we'll be celebrating our 31-year wedding anniversary in October of this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it was
Wow.
interesting because when we met, I told him, I said, look, I hate West Texas. I don't really care for Texas. I said, I'm probably going to move back to the South. I said, I moved out here. This is kind of what I needed to separate from my ex-husband, make some really good money. But this is not going to be long term. And so I never made it back South. I mean, after we ended up getting married, he was in Dallas at the time. So we're in Dallas 15 years. Then I relocated to Missouri for work, and I've been in the Coachella Valley since 2012.
And is it safe to say that California is your favorite place to be?
It really is. Yeah.
I mean, we're a little biased, but I had to ask.
We love it here. And,
Yeah.
and what's so interesting about that, Daniel grew up in Texas, and forever he would always say, because he works for himself, which is great. He owns his own company. He's a structured settlement specialist, Caldwell Capital Resources. I'm so proud of him. He's 25 years, and he's just been amazing. He's done well. And he would always say, wherever you get promoted or wherever you go in this healthcare career, I'm fine with that because, I'm flexible. But we're not moving to California. And it's like, okay, he's like, it costs too much money. The people are kind of strange.
He ate his words real quick.
We're not moving there.
Yeah.
And so when I had the opportunity in Palm Springs, I said, okay, well, can my husband come with me to interview? Because if he's not going to like it here, it's a no.
Yeah.
He came with me. He goes, this is pretty cool. And probably a year after we were here, he said, we're going to retire here. And we both fell in love with California. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So never say never.
Never say never.
I
And
know.
has he seen other parts of California? I mean, that's my other question. Hopefully he's accepted all of Cali, because Cali's where it's at.
It is.
I'm
It
born
is.
and raised. I'm a California native.
Okay,
So, yeah.
great.
So you mentioned that you were spiritual. So you didn't grow up in the church?
Baptist.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes.
So spiritual is also religious for you?
Yes, it
Gotcha.
is.
Sometimes when I hear spiritual, and I should break myself of that assumption, but I assume that if someone's spiritual, then they're not so much religious. I always
Yes.
look at religion or spirituality. Let's get back to your work. What led you, let's tell folks what you do. Let's talk a bit about what you've done and what led you to your work.
Yeah, so I think I said earlier, I was always really good in math and science, right? And so when I first went to Alabama A&M, for whatever reason, and keep in mind, I didn't have a lot of guidance because my parents, they weren't, college educated. So for whatever reason, I thought, I'm going to major in business administration. Why? I don't know. And first couple of classes, I was just bored to tears. And I was talking with one of the professors and just said, what do you like? I'm like, I like math and science. Why are you majoring in business? It's like, I don't know. And he said, okay, go over to the arts and sciences department and talk with Dr. Ward. I think you might really like him. And I went over there, and he was one of the professors, but he had been in the military. And he said, tell me what you like. And I told him, he goes, maybe you should major in zoology with a minor in chemistry, and then you can do a year of clinical internship and become a medical lab technician. He goes, that's what I did. He goes, you'll love it. And I'm like, okay. And that's what I did. And so
And you loved it.
I did. I really did. And I still do, even though I'm a hospital CEO. And so I did that, graduated, did a year of clinical internship, became a medical technologist. And I've always been someone who's been pretty aggressive, wanting to always be a leader. Maybe it was growing up, as an only kid. And so did that for about 6 years, became a lab director. So now I'm directing the lab. And then I realized, wow, I'm still young. I'm a lab director, but there's got to be more. And realize that if I go back to grad school, get my master's in healthcare administration, I can get in administration, and I think I can have a greater impact if I do that. And I did. I went back to grad school, and when I still had a year left before I finished my master's degree, the CEO at the time promoted me to chief operating officer. And this was back in the 90s. So, I didn't do like the formal fellowships or internships. I was lab director, but I worked really hard. I would always raise my hand if there was something extra they needed. And so he noticed that. And so they didn't have a COO for like 6 months. Get a call from his secretary, and she says, Mr. Warren wants to see you. And I'm thinking, okay, what is it? And usually, I'm thinking it's one of the doctors. They're upset about something, but so all the way to his office, I'm walking and I'm mad. And I'm trying to formulate in my head, what could be wrong. I walk in and he says, have a seat. Sitting down. And he goes, we hadn't had a COO for about 6 months now. And I'm realizing I can't do all this. I know you're very close to finishing up your master's degree. What do you think? What do you think about coming in administration? I'll give you some departments. I'll mentor you and work with you. He goes, what do you think? And I'm like, okay. So I go back to my office.
But that is huge.
I know, but I didn't realize how huge it was. I called the HR director and I said, Mr. Ray, what just happened? He says, I think he just asked you to be his COO. And I'm like, okay. And so that was kind of how it happened. And he and I are still like really, really good friends, even today. We went to each other's daughter's wedding, and he's just a really nice man.
What is it about you, you have this ability to be able to, mentors find you and vice versa. It seems like a lot of the doors that have been opened for you were through A, your talents, but B, through mentors. And
Absolutely.
What is it about that?
I think that, number one, I typically have always, even as a kid, raised my hand, right? And I think what it taught me about myself, and I know how I have promoted other people now that I've been in a position, people are always watching you, right? And so if you see, because the people I've promoted, you see that young man or that young woman, and they're always going the extra mile. They're raising their hand when no one else does. And you see something in them and you think, wow, this is someone I can take under my wing and I can really mentor them. And I just feel so blessed because I see so many young people I've mentored that now they're COOs, they're CEOs, they're running their own shop, and it just makes you feel good.
Yeah. I think that people inherently, most people want to do good, and I think that everybody has a mentor in them.
Right.
And I've had a couple of opportunities, more like through the station and internships, but I'm a big brother, but any chance I get to try to mentor somebody, I'm like, yes, this is what life's about.
Absolutely.
Right? It's making sure that you are contributing and creating and bringing light to somebody's life. So this is fantastic. My next question, which you just answered, was, are you a mentor? So you've mentored several people.
Absolutely.
And it's never planned. It just kind of happens, right?
It really does. It kind of happens. And before I go to that, I will share something with you that I think is very important because, when I was promoted, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes, when we move into a certain role, we think, okay, that's it. I'm here. People are going to accept me, right, into this role. And I remember Mr. Warren and I were at a meeting, and I hadn't been a COO for that long. And it was one of those rubber chicken, chamber kind of events.
Which you've attended a ton of.
Yes. And so we're together, which is back then, this is the 90s, so probably an odd couple. He's 6'5", white male, and, here I am, this little short African-American female. And he's talking to this other kind of elderly white male, and then he introduced me, and he says, she's my COO, and he says, what is that? And so before I could say anything, he said, she's the chief operating officer. She's the second in charge. She's my right-hand person. She runs the hospital. And he's like, oh, but he's still looking at me odd. And it's like my heart sank, right? Because I was so excited about the title and the role, and I just assumed everyone else was going to accept me in that role.
Yeah.
So we're driving back to the hospital, and I'm like, I'm still just hurt on the inside. And he could feel it. And I didn't want to talk to him. I'm looking out the window. I'm not making eye contact. He said, Carolyn, he said, I need you to listen to something. You need to understand there are not a lot of people like you right now. He goes, there are not a lot of women. There are not a lot of African Americans. You are going to have people say things to you that are just not smart.
Yeah.
And he goes, you can't get mad every time that happens. He goes, you have to just deal with it. You have to work hard, and you can't just hold it in.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm still
Don't take
mad.
it personally.
Right. And I'm like, okay. But that day, it still hurts even to this day when I think about it. But luckily, he was there and was able to kind of coach me through that situation. Because
Yeah.
here I am thinking, okay, I'm the COO,
Yeah.
And he's like, and this guy just kind of burst my bubble. And I'm like, no, I should not have let him have that kind of impact on me. But when you're young, you do take it personal.
Yeah. What's interesting is that to hear you, and you still say that it still bothers you a little bit. I think that we all have instances like that, and I think that in your case, and sometimes in mine, it can fuel us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, that's where we're at. All right, watch this. This is a weird question. I don't think you can really answer it, but do you think his attitude or reaction was more because you were a woman or more because you were black? That's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think both, right? I think both because I was, at that time, the first female and the first African American to ever have held that position at that hospital. And so I think he knew, even when he promoted me, that, it was going to be a challenge and that he really had to support me,
Get behind you.
and be behind me
Yeah.
and invest in me. And he did. It was a community that was a very diverse community. So I think in a lot of ways he needed me as well,
Yeah.
as he was trying to maneuver, through that community. Because there were times when some of the African American doctors would come to my office and close the door and say, can I believe what that guy's saying? And I'm like, yeah, he's a great guy. You can. You can do that. And he and I would have very candid conversations, just about the community. And there was this one organization that it was an African American organization, and so kind of a bullying, a little bit of a technique of, oh, if you don't, support my cause, I'm gonna everybody who's African American is gonna be mad at you, right? And so my boss, he came to me one day, he goes, I think we got to do this. And I'm like, why? He goes, we don't want everybody mad with us. I'm like, let me tell you something. I said, it's not like that. I said, you know what? This group isn't even well respected in the African American community. And I said, so don't think that if we don't support this event, that everybody in the African American community is going to be upset with you or with us. It's not that way. He was like, oh, he goes, well, I thought if we didn't, they would be mad. I'm like, no. I said, we don't have, that's money we can save and, do something else with it. So we helped each other in that regard.
And I like that's a really good example because it's cultural. And he probably was like, whoa, like he would expected you to be completely on board with that.
Exactly.
And you're like, no, that's not what it takes. Mr. Warren was his name?
Yes.
Rest in peace?
No,
still with
we're
us.
still very good friends.
Love it. All right. Sorry about that. You're not going anywhere anytime soon. Please bear with me because I do tend to jump all over the place.
No, that's fine.
All right, I've been fairly focused, but I want to take a step back to your childhood and your parents and this excellent credit. I think that I'm baffled by that for some reason. I think that that's something that we just don't learn, right? But as far as generational wealth, this is my question for you. I know that they have passed on, correct?
Yes.
So did you get an inheritance?
I did.
Okay.
Did. And
Wow.
I held on to it for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized that I'm never going to move back to rural Alabama. And I reached out. Well, actually, this gentleman reached out to me because a lot of people had reached out to me to sell it. Like, do you want to sell the house? And I had already sold most of the land where my parents were still living. So I'm glad I did that because they could use the money at that time. And this gentleman reached out to me and he says, "Look," he goes, "your land really, it connects with my land." And he said, "Are you going to ever move back here?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not.
Never happening.
I'm not going to do that." And he says, "I'll buy it." He says, "Because, you know, if and the house was still on the land and everything." And he said, "You know, let's come up with a deal." And so I got the deeds and it was, you know, in my name and everything. And I sold it. And I never really looked back or felt bad about it. I mean, occasionally my daughter lives in Atlanta, Georgia, now with her husband and kids. And so sometimes we'll ride there because it's like a 45-minute drive. You know, all of my aunts are now deceased. And so other than some cousins, I mean, there's no one there. The home, you know, I'll ride by it and you get kind of nostalgic. But I'm glad I sold it, you know, and I sold it to someone who really wanted it, was going to take care of it, and it was right. I mean, it was the land connected. I knew him, you know, growing up as a kid, and it just made sense.
There's a lot to be said for you selling the land to somebody that you liked and you knew that it would be taken care of.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for that. Nostalgia, I was talking to my buddy about this the other day, and it's been a hot topic for me lately as far as how nostalgia can sometimes be a little dangerous, but sometimes positive. I want to talk to you about that at some point. But this was where my question was leading to this. Will your daughter receive an inheritance?
Our kids, oh yes, we've already got it set up.
Wow.
So think about my husband's in insurance.
Totally. So it was a dumb question.
Yeah.
But because I think that as far as people of color, I know as far as my connection to my mother and father, I never expected an inheritance. My mother passed in 2000. I never received one, obviously, which is okay. And my father, doesn't have that. It doesn't live like that. But there's it seems like again there's a new standard was set with your parents, with you, and it's going to continue, right?
Right. Yes, and because of what my husband does, with structured settlements, and even before going into that, just being in the insurance industry, and he's seen that, he's experienced when families will pass away and they haven't taken care of things appropriately. So you have kids, right, who are entitled, or family members who are entitled to a home or land or money, but because things weren't done appropriately, it ends up just really being a legal nightmare. And so he's taking care of all that and you've met our son, right? So for both kids.
Right. And your kids are fantastic.
Yeah. Oh,
well, your son, that's the one who I remember specifically. Generational wealth, as hot topics continue to, trend and people are having these discussions, which is so fantastic. This is what needs to happen, is people just talking, dialogue. Generational wealth is something I have to keep arguing with people against because, I don't want to go as simple as gerrymandering, but when you look at, what black folks were and were not allowed to have in the past hundreds of years, let alone just the past 40 or 50, again, it seems like this experience was rare for you in Camp Hill. Were other black folks thriving too?
So it's interesting that some were, but some weren't. And I think that was my mother's father had land also. And so it was just kind of a generational thing with them. And I think that was why they instilled that in me as well, that, to have a home, she had a car, he had a truck. And so when people say, "Oh, you grew up poor," and I'm like, we weren't poor. I said, we were rural, we weren't rich, but, we had things, and the things they had, they were very proud of them and they took care of them. Because, she would get so frustrated if she would pass someone's house and, it was run down or there were like old cars in the yard, and she was like, if you've been blessed with something, you need to take care of it.
I agree with her.
That just one of those things that just stuck with me.
She was about that look. Were you always in little dresses as a kid?
Oh, absolutely.
You were a little
yes.
doll. You were the doll. When I just said that nostalgia can be dangerous, does that sound right? Does that resonate to you or no?
I think that I think it can, but I also think that is good, right, in a lot of ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I just threw that out there. Again, I'm all over the board with these conversations. And I was talking to a friend, and he was listening to music, and it was reminding him of some sad times, and he kind of stayed in that place. And I'm like, yo, that's a prime example of how nostalgia can be dangerous. But to each their own. All right, let's move into some relevant topics about today. I spoke to Ron Doden. As you know, I've talked to kind of a plethora of people, and I usually save this question for the end of this topic. But do you have hope as far as what's happening with race relations and just all of this anger that people are dealing with? And in your experience, have you always had hope? Where are you with that?
I tend to be a very positive person, and I think we have to have hope, right? When I was in Dallas, and whatever community I work in, I always try to find vulnerable populations and do work there, because I also think that, particularly as minorities, when we find ourselves in positions where we can help people and be of influence, we have to do that. And the one thing that really early on, when I would do work in some of the communities in the Dallas area, when I would look into these kids' eyes and you could see there was no hope. And when people lose hope, it's really sad. So I think we have to keep that hope, right? We have to keep that feeling that that things will get better, right? And that doesn't mean that you're oblivious to what's happening. I mean, what's happening is real. I know even at my hospital there in Long Beach, when everything was going on and with the protests, and the hospital is very diverse. We're an urban facility, downtown, but you could just kind of feel that tension.
Right.
And so we are a Catholic hospital. So I went to one of our sisters and said, we need to do something. Went to the HR director. So we had a day of solidarity and prayer, and it was beautiful. And employees, some were crying, and we prayed, and
It was needed.
It was needed, and we played music, and then we had these little cards that they could write their feelings down on and hang on a tree. We put a tree in the lobby of the hospital and just say, write your feelings down. And there were so many employees that reached back out and said, thank you for that, because you could just feel they needed something. They needed to know that it's okay, to talk about this. And our facility is probably about 75% represented by unions. And my SEIU group is a very diverse group. And so they were following the rules, but they were having an event on campus, and they were calling it Black Lives Matter. And so typically, with management, you think, okay, management's union, you don't want to go out there. And I'm like, no, I'm going out there. I have a great relationship with these guys. I go to their meetings. And so I went outside where they were, and I said, you know what? I just want to thank you guys. And they were so happy. They were like, oh, it's our CEO. I said, yes. And they thanked me. They said, thank you for having that event where people could just come and we could talk and we could write our feelings down. And they gave me a Black Lives Matter sign. And so that's why I said, when you're a leader, you have to think about the things that you do and how people are looking at you. And so I think the fact that I felt comfortable and I could feel that our teams just needed that outlet, that they could talk, and that it was okay. It was okay to be sad. It was okay to be angry. It was okay to have these feelings of frustration, but know that, we're going to work together, and that we're going to get through this.
Yeah. You keep mentioning the word leader, which is obvious. You'd have to be a leader to be able to kind of be in the roles that you've been in, right? Be in the shoes that you have lived in. I just love your story, and as we continue to learn more, but you use that as an example as far as how you thought, okay, something needs to change. How can I get with this group and create a change, such as the Day of Solidarity? I spoke with David earlier. We talked about how you kind of bridge the gap between, the gay community and your time here at Desert Regional. How does somebody who is not on your level, for lack of better words, how can they get creative? How do we encourage people to get creative? How, is it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how do we give these kids hope?
I think, I think what everyone can do is that what we taught our kids, right, is that people are more alike than they're different. And
Right.
I think a lot of times the prejudice that people feel, or it's because it's out of fear, because they don't know, right? This person, they look different, they worship different. They're gay, I'm straight. I mean, there's just so much. But if you get to know people and really try to understand them, you realize that we're really more alike than we're different. And so that's what I always tell people, but if we stay in our little bubble, whatever that bubble is, then we're never, going to come to that happy medium, because my group is different from your group. I'll tell you about a very recent funny story. Daniel and I were eating outside at this restaurant in Long Beach, because now it's like dine out. And two of our friends were there that they're both gay, just great guys. And so they had a friend that owns the Silver Fox in Long Beach. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's this huge gay bar, right?
Okay.
And so they're like, oh, let's social distance. We can all talk. And so we didn't know the owner of the Silver Fox, but I heard about him because he supports my hospital, because I have my own DAP. It's called CARE. And so I knew that he was a huge supporter. So we're talking. And so he finally looks at me, looks at Daniel. And, it always comes up, where are you guys from? I hear their accent. And John says, you're from Alabama, right? I'm like, yeah. And he looks at Daniel. He goes, you're from Texas. And Daniel says, yeah. He goes, why are you guys so accepting? And so he was struggling with the fact that, we're friends with his two friends. We're very accepting of people. And before I could say anything, Daniel said, we just love everybody. And we taught our kids to do the same, right? I was happy that he felt comfortable asking us that, but I don't know what his background was, that he's thinking, okay, here are these two black people from the South, right? And they're accepting of me. They're accepting of these guys, and we're totally different. We're white, we're gay. How is this? And I think it does start, sometimes when you're younger, but even as we get older, it's just that learning that acceptance. It's okay to accept people for who they are and try to learn about them.
Yeah. Talking with Stan Henry the other day, and we were talking just pretty much about this, and we have much more in common than not, right? So we were using silly examples like, we like pizza, we like and it's true. I mean, you can start from something as small as food to something as grand as your morals, right? And things that you believe in. So you mentioned Black Lives Matter. Let's move into that quickly. This has been such a positive conversation, and I really like that. And I don't ever want it to be a negative conversation, but sometimes people have stories to share that are a little, on the doom and gloom side. So I'm really relieved to hear that that's not your perspective, right? You're just a positive person, and you always have been. What do you think about Black Lives Matter? What do you think about let's start with that, and then I want to move on to white privilege. I want to move on to maybe a couple of other topics. You can say something very brief. You cannot say anything at all. But what do you think about Black Lives Matter? Because I feel like there's this division with a lot of people as far as the message and then the organization.
Right. So this is my perspective. Being African American, having an African American husband, obviously, having an African American son. When people say, well, all lives matter, the way I feel about that is that, all lives can't matter unless Black lives matter. My life matters. I don't like to feel that my son or my husband may not come home one day because they have a routine traffic stop and it goes bad, right? We lived in Missouri when our son went to the University of Arkansas. And I'm sure you hear the stories where African American parents tell their sons, if you ever get pulled over by the cop, just follow the rules. The goal is to make it home alive.
Right.
Well, we always told our son, it was just a 3.5-hour drive, but we said, if you're going to leave on Friday and you're not going to make it home before it gets dark, stay till Saturday morning. Because we didn't want him driving through those little towns coming home. Maybe nothing would have ever happened, but that was just what we felt. Daniel used to love to jog. And so he would like to go jogging at night, And I would always say, take your driver's license. He's like, honey, why? I mean, this is our neighborhood. I live here. I said, I don't want something to happen and you're jogging and someone stops you and says, hey, this house got broken into, and you're standing there going, but I live here, but you have no proof that you live here. So those are the things that we feel, right? And that we think. And that's real. And because I think of incidents that we see, things that happen, even though, because of the position I'm in, I've had good relationships with police officers in communities that I live in because, everybody wants to know the hospital CEO and you want to know your police chief and your police officers. But when we get pulled over, there's always that little bit of a fear, like that little bit like, uh-oh, even if you're speeding, right? It's like, I hope this goes okay. Yeah. And so when we say all lives matter, because of whatever, yes, all lives matter, but all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. Until, as a mother and a wife, I'm not afraid, when they leave home. I'm not afraid for my son to drive from Missouri to Arkansas, at night. Or I'm not afraid for my husband to go jogging in the neighborhood that he lives in without a driver's license because I'm thinking someone's going to stop him, someone's going to question him, and maybe even question, do you really live in this neighborhood? Those are feelings that are real to us.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, a lot of things cross my mind as you talk. And why do you think that the people that don't quite understand what we're saying and what we mean when we say, of course, all lives matter, but we're talking about Black Lives Matter, why don't you think that it resonates with certain people? Is it just inherent prejudice? Just call it what it is?
Yeah, I think it's experience, right? Because if you have never experienced something, if you, like when people say things like, I'm in this body every day, right? And so when you see me, you're going to see an African American female. That's who I am. When you see my husband, right? That's who you're going to see. But if you don't live in this body, if you don't, if you're not concerned about how people are going to perceive you or how people are going to treat you, then it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's just that you don't understand.
Yeah, you don't get it.
You don't get it. You don't understand what we're going through. Daniel and I were talking just yesterday. And when we first got married, we were looking for this house there in Texas and start a home, obviously. So we had told this realtor, this is what we want, right? And so my daughter, she was 4 when we got married. So we got this little kid and want a safe neighborhood. We didn't have a lot of money, but there were still things that we wanted. And this realtor kept showing us these horrible houses in these horrible neighborhoods. And so finally I said, stop. I said, you've not shown us anything we told you that we wanted. I said, would you want to live here? If you had a child? He said, well, this is what you guys said you could afford. I said, just take us back. Take us back. Let's get our car. And then we found another realtor and we found a beautiful starter home in an amazing neighborhood. And so that's also, you've got to be willing to call it out for what it is, right? And stand up for yourself as well.
I like that you said that you have to be willing to call it out. I think a lot of people, we either come from rage or we come from, I don't want to say intimidation, but it's like, all right, let me pick and choose my battles. But I truly believe in a space of accountability.
Right.
And that's kind of what you practice. There was a story about a Black family somewhere in the South. They called somebody to cut like a plumber, and the plumber rolled up and was giving them a bid, and then they went outside to look at his truck, and she had Trump all over the truck. She says, no, I don't want your business.
Right.
And that's accountability. It's an interesting example, but it's accountability. I was with a friend of mine a few weeks ago. We were at a store, and this store, they didn't want people's cell phones out. The rule was you can talk on your cell phone, but you can't be on it, right? So I was standing in line. My friend was behind me. He's white, and I was on a call, right? He was on his phone doing something, and the security came up and said, sir, I need you to not be on your phone. But didn't say anything to me. You get where I'm going with this.
Right.
The point is my friend felt profiled and now never wants to go back to that store and still bitches about it to this day, pardon my French. And I love it. I love it because I'm like, there's one small sliver of what we experience every damn day. Pardon my French again.
No, exactly.
So it's also important that viewers and listeners hear this because I don't want people that believe that all lives matter and they don't quite get the message. I don't want them to just give up on the idea. It's true. It's about education. It's about experiencing something different than what you know. You know,
Exactly.
we always try to encourage people here. Travel. It's a great way to just experience. See what freedom doesn't look like in other places. See what racism looks like for other cultures. Sign with an X. That's always going to blow my mind. So as we continue to talk about the movement, do you think that you already mentioned that you do have hope? Do you think that these people that are on the opposite side, on the opposition, you think they'll come around?
I think some people will.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I really do. I think that some won't. It's just based on how they are raised. I had a really good friend when I was living in Midland, Texas, and she was a white female, and we were talking one day. We became friends, and she said she was from Tennessee. So I'm from Alabama, and she says, I want to share something with you. She goes, I'm not racist. I'm like, no, of course you're not. And she says, but I want to tell you what my father told me. And she says, and I don't think that he meant this badly, but this was kind of what was inside of him. So he had told her, because she didn't have a college degree, but she had a good job there at the hospital. And she said, what he said to me was that I need you to know that even if you don't have a college degree, that black people, even if they have a college degree, that because you're white, you're always going to be better than them. And she said she didn't feel that way. She didn't believe it, but that was what he taught her.
Straight up said it.
Yeah. And so after we became friends, she shared that with me, and she says, don't get me wrong. She said, my father's he's a good person. She said, but that was how he felt. And she says, I never felt that way, but he felt that way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's just very interesting.
But highlight the fact that you said that she said he was a good person.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't necessarily with malice, right? It's just what he just knew.
That was what he knew.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of the things that we see when you learn about taught racism, learned behaviors, there's usually some sort of rage attached to the image. And this is just a man who sounds like he had a very clear, loving delivery to his daughter.
Right.
And it just was a fact.
And luckily,
Which we
she
know it
was
isn't.
someone that she didn't feel that way,
Thank God.
and as she moved on and progressed in her life. But I felt, it made me feel good that she felt comfortable enough with me to share that.
Yeah, it's all learning.
Yeah.
It's all learning. And I love it because I guess to me also there's a small example in that story, which is that even if you are taught racism and it's something that you were raised with, we're all individuals. You can make your own choices and be able to say, this doesn't feel right to me. This isn't right.
Exactly.
You don't have to just fall in line. Right? And that's why I love free thinking. My mother always encouraged me to be a free thinker, question authority, all that stuff. But more importantly, to follow the golden rule and treat people with respect. And I think that's something that people need to practice, especially nowadays. COVID-19. You're a hospital CEO. What's the deal? Can we start to relax? We're not even close, right?
No, we're not. And that's another thing too. And I'm sure you've seen the headlines, and it's very true. We've got COVID, and it was interesting because, February, January, we're thinking, okay, it's, in China, wherever it comes to the States, well, it's older people, it's, okay, we're going to shut down for a couple of weeks, and then, wow, here we are. I can't emphasize enough, wash your hand, wear a face mask, do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing is that it is impacting minority communities very heavily, right? And I was interviewed for this in one of the news outlets there in Long Beach. Like, what are you guys seeing? Yeah, of course, that's what we're seeing. And what it is, I actually was on the American Hospital Association's Institute for Diversity, and I chaired the institute in 2011. And so we're still dealing with a lot of those things now, right? When we talk about inequities in care, social determinants of health, where are the neighborhoods where you see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where are the neighborhoods where you have, individuals living in multiple housing units, lower paying jobs, individuals who a lot of them were in the service industry, right? And so they're being exposed. And so that's what you were seeing. And so I was so happy there in Long Beach. The president of the NAACP, Naomi, she was like on the ground, trying to educate not just the African American community, but the marginalized community, the seniors, people who were Hispanic or Cambodian, and she didn't have enough supplies. And so I saw this need that she had. And so my hospital, because we had a lot of things, we had a lot of masks and gloves. And so we just sent her a truckload of things. And she was so happy.
I bet.
Because she was like, wow, thank you. And it wasn't just our facility, other people were helping them, but she was just so happy because she's like, I'm out here and I'm trying to talk to people and tell them, this is real, and you need to, wear a face mask, and these are all things that you need to do. And I think that's another thing that we can do as well is make sure we're trying to educate people, and particularly in some of the, minority or marginalized communities that, this is real and the steps that they can take. But when we ask, one thing that is really unfortunate is that in the minority community, particularly African American community, there is not a lot of trust of the healthcare system. Some of that stems back to the Tuskegee, experiment that went on for like 40 years. And so that's another reason why in this role, even when I was a chief operating officer, communities that I worked in, I would always try to go out into the African American community and be visible to let them know that, you can trust me. But that distrust, that fear is real. I remember going out and doing health fairs and, giving information, and people would ask, what are you going to do with this? No, we're trying to help you. So I think because of that, you have a group of people also that they just don't trust the healthcare system, and rightfully so, because of things that have happened to them in the past. So because of that distrust, they're probably not as eager to get the help or to ask questions, which is another reason why it's so important that we have diversity in our healthcare field. We need to have physicians, nurses, administrators that look like the communities they serve, so they can go out and connect with those communities.
And that's happening, right? We are seeing diversity within the healthcare system.
Absolutely.
I mean, even when I go to see my primary, I'm like, oh, hey.
Yes.
I'm hearing somebody speaking Spanish in the corner, right? They're accommodating, and that's you're seeing things diversify.
Absolutely.
I love it. See, that's what I love about you. Every answer's got something positive at the end. I mean, this is part of your message and part of who you are. I asked you this earlier, and I know you can't answer it, but it's really because of how you're positioned. But how do you make giving back seem so easy? You're like, oh, well, so then we had the masks and we had this, so we loaded a truck. Or you're like, it's a day of solidarity. People were sad, so we just did it. Like, you make it sound and seem so easy. How do we get people that are listening to make small calls to action for themselves?
I think it has to be a part of who you are.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it goes back to my parents, right? Because they farm, we had this little small farm, and so they would grow food, right? And you gave it away. I mean, you fed your neighbors, and if someone needed something, whether it was vegetables or we had cows and pigs and everything. So they were always helping. Now, the difference was that my father was a lot more free-hearted, right? He was like, oh, help them, they need something. My mom, on the other hand, would sometimes say, well, when we were, out there working in the hot sun and planting our garden, what were they doing? And he would say, honey, we've got plenty, go ahead and give them some greens. It's like, okay. And so I think we should, as a people, we should want to help people, right? And this is what we always taught our kids as well. If God has blessed you to be in a position where your voice has meaning, then you should want to help people. You should always want to reach back and help. If you're working in a community, you should want to help that community. What can you do to make it better?
It sounds like, as your upbringing, as far as what you saw and from your parents and from their actions, you had a real definition of community. There's a word community, there's a show community, and then there's a feeling of community, and that is truly a village. It's looking out for everybody, right? Making sure everybody's got a piece. I love that. And I was kind of raised similar to that. I was raised in a small suburb. My mom was very immersed in the community. And that's, I think I attribute a lot of my volunteerism to that. It's just, I feel like we're obligated. We need to do that. All right. We could talk for hours. I don't want to wrap this up just yet. But as always, I ask my guests, is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation? Anything that's important to you that you'd like listeners or viewers to hear?
I think that the main thing I would say, Brian, is that we are in a very challenging time right now in our country, in our communities. And what I would tell listeners particularly is that if you're in a position where people listen, to what you're saying, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to help others. And educate yourself, because we have a tendency to watch things that feel comfortable to us, right? I mean, we love MSNBC, we love CNN, but I'll watch Fox because I want to know what is the opposing side saying, and just reading your local news. I love reading the LA Times. I still read the Desert Sun, even though I'm in Long Beach. I read the Press Telegram as well. And something that it goes back to that upbringing, never being afraid to speak up. If you see something that isn't right or just doesn't feel right, you can speak up. You don't have to even be in a position of authority to do that. So we should always be willing to lend our voice or to lend ourselves, to help others, and try to do whatever you can to make the situation you're in better. And I think sometimes people feel like, they've got to do these big grand things, right? It's like, oh, I've got to, send a truckload of things over to help people. You don't. I think you can do what's within you or what's within your means to try to help people. If everyone can just do one little small act of kindness every day, just think how wonderful things would be. And then when you're listening to what people are telling you, how they feel or their life experiences, we all have a different life experience. Listen, try to understand that person and understand what they've gone through and be there for them.
I love it. Speak up, use your voice, acts of kindness, and listening. I think that, especially in such an inflammatory time we're living in, people want to debate and argue and talk, but people are sometimes hearing, they're not listening.
Correct.
They're not making a conscious effort to understand what the person's saying, right? So thank you for that. Also, and as I told you before, we always ask for some solutions. Do you have something to lend to that? What are some solutions for people at home that they can do to do their part?
I think solutions is, try and have an open mind. And just going back to, as we see things happening around us, what can you do to make a difference, right? I go back to, working in the lab and realizing I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make a difference, and feeling like, well, I can't do it here, and I can't, I've got to get more education. But even if it's not an educational type of thing, just try to look and think about what can I do as a person to make things better, around me.
I love it.
We can all do something.
And as you said, it's not this Herculean task. It's
No.
not this huge mountain you have to climb. It could be as simple as just going through your closet, grabbing some clothes you don't use, and dropping them off at the shelter.
Exactly.
Right? Making a small donation to a charity that you believe in. What are some charities of your choice before we say goodbye?
Before we say goodbye.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I'd love Desert AIDS Project,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
So the American Heart Association
Uh-huh.
is another one, Boys and Girls Club,
Uh-huh.
those type of organizations. And of course, I have dear friends that work with theater, so Desert Performs, those guys, Chuck Yates with Coyote Stagecoach. So really trying to be there to support them as individuals, but support those causes as well.
All right, I love it. Desert AIDS Project, Boys and Girls Club, theater. Lots of loves, lots of philanthropy, lots of time. You gave me over an hour. I appreciate that.
Has it been over an hour?
It's been over an hour.
Oh
It's
my
been good.
gosh.
It was good. Time
It's
flies
been
when you're having
great.
fun,
I
right?
know. It's been wonderful.
Covered some great stuff.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people just need to hear others,
Yeah.
right? And just go, wow,
Right.
we're all in this together.
Right.
And we can make a difference.
Thank you. And we're not, it'd be nice to cure cancer. You'd probably be better at that than me. But it's not like we're trying to, again, move mountains. We're just here having dialogue. I think for people to be able to, resonate, things that people are able to understand and learn about. Now I'm rambling. It's been a long day. But again, I'm just so grateful you're here today. We're going to get you back. All right. So be ready for that call when I call you back. Everybody, Carolyn Caldwell, we appreciate you. And we also appreciate all of the viewers and listeners, new and old meaning loyal. We love you. Do your part. Take care of each other. And talk to you soon.